Well, we'll get there in a few minutes, but the main scripture that we'll talk about tonight comes from Numbers chapter 12, because not only did you choose to come to church on a Wednesday night, but I know you wanted something from the deep Old Testament. Father spoke to me, and so Numbers chapter 12 is where we're headed. If you are not familiar with what we're doing over the Wednesdays this summer, outside of the first Wednesdays where we do a night of worship, we're covering some subjects that are maybe under-discussed in church culture. Recently, one of my all-time favorite comedians died. His name was Bob Newhart. I know half of the church is well acquainted with Bob Newhart, and the other half are like the guy from Bob's Burgers? And no, it's not. Bob Newhart was a brilliant comedian, but my favorite thing Bob Newhart ever did was he played a psychologist on the Bob Newhart Show. And because he passed away, I listened to his memoir. It's not an autobiography, it's a memoir where he discusses a lot of his life and his favorite anecdotes. And one of the things he did when he talked about that show was he said, a lot of times I'll have people say, hey, your character made me want to go into psychology. And he says, and I always think that's great, but I don't think I really helped anybody. Because throughout the show, the people that had the issues in season 1 still had the issues in season 7, even though they had been going for 7 years. And as funny as that sounds, what it makes me think about are the things that we're talking about on the Wednesdays this summer. So if you're watching online on the live stream or something, this will be an abbreviated message because we will cut the live stream at the end of it, and then we'll have a discussion here in house. And hopefully if you're watching this with people, you can have your own discussion as well. But I wonder if we're a little bit like Bob Newhart on the Bob Newhart Show, because the church is not doing so hot. And when I say the church, I mean just like the overall church. If you notice, there's all sorts of issues that happen. Pastors fall all the time, people that you never thought would. We've discussed it already, but names like Tony Evans, who have had issues, Robert Morris, who had massive issues, people that, while we don't look at them and say, oh, that's Jesus for today, we kind of act like they are. And we can't put our hope in what another person teaches or believes. We can use it as teachable points, as guideposts, signposts pointing us to Jesus, who actually initiates the change. But why is it that things don't look a whole lot different inside of the church? So the last couple of weeks, we talked about gluttony. We spent an hour talking about gluttony. That was fun. I threw out zebra cakes for people that asked good questions, except for the one that I saved so I could eat it when I went home. Of course, my wife beat me home, and she was already microwaving a little molten lava cake, so. Hey, this is a transparent ministry, all right? So we talked about gluttony. That was fun. So last week, we discussed mental health, which is not really a problem in the church because we have faith. But here's the reality. I mean, we don't talk about gluttony, even though it's listed as a sin. We don't talk about mental health because we don't want to step on toes. And in all reality, we're a triune being. We are a spirit who has a soul, our mind, will, and emotions, and we live in a body. So sometimes we have body issues, sometimes we have mind issues, sometimes we have spirit issues. And these are all important to be discussed. And it's just important to know that the spirit doesn't fix everything, although it all starts with the spirit. So this week, one of the suggestions that I received that the church doesn't talk about a lot is gossip. So we're talking about gossip tonight, which is really dangerous to talk about in church because what do you do then? You don't get any more prayer requests about people, right? So that's dark humor for church culture. Hey, so-and-so needs prayer because, well, I saw that they fill in the blank. Your motive is off, but I think I do need to pray about that actually. In Numbers 12 is where we're going to talk tonight, and the title of tonight's message is called Loose Lips. Some of you may be familiar with the old saying, but it is loose lips sink ships. Okay, that comes from World War II, because in World War II, what they were saying is be careful what you share, especially when it comes to something of national security. I understand that. We serve in a military community. But what I would submit to you is that loose lips don't just sink ships, they sink lives. We are way too reckless with our words, and I think a lot of it comes from cowardice. So I know some of y'all might even get annoyed at hearing this, but one of the things that I love to say here is conflict means conversation, and the reason that I do that is because when you can be direct, first of all, you don't have problems that linger or fester. If you can do that, you can hash it out one-on-one, and a lot of times, if you don't do it, there's something in you that has to get it out, and since you have to get it out, but we don't have the intestinal fortitude, to take it to the person directly. We're like, well, I just got to vent. And don't hear what I'm not saying. A good vent is necessary sometimes. A safe person. Nobody needs 18 safe people to vent to, though. All right? Now, in Numbers chapter 12, we see something that used to happen in the Old Testament called family drama. Those poor savages back then. We don't have drama in families now. So, starting right in verse 1, listen to this. It's the complaints of Miriam and Aaron. These are the sister and the brother of Moses. While they were at Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because he had married a Cushite woman. Yeah, y'all already know the drama, don't you? No, you don't, right? But have you ever taken part in gossip or heard gossip where somebody's like, can you believe who he's with? All right, got really quiet. They said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he spoken through us too? Emphasis mine. But the Lord heard them. That should be the scariest sentence in this whole chapter to you. And then in parentheses, it says in verse 3, now Moses was very humble, more humble than any other person on earth. Fun Bible fact, the book of Numbers is ascribed to Moses as the author. Although biblical scholars don't think it was just Moses, it's a collection over time. It's still funny to think about. Oh, I'll show them. Moses was. And if Moses did write it, just know this, God let it in. That's all I'm saying, all right? All right, verse 4. So immediately the Lord called to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam and said, go out to the tabernacle, all three of you. I just had a moment like this with Emmeline and Timothy, my kids, today. Both of you in here. All right, that's what the Lord did. So the three of them went to the tabernacle, and the Lord descended in the pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tabernacle. Aaron and Miriam, he called, and they stepped forward. And the Lord said to them, now listen to what I say. And he said, if there were prophets among you, I, the Lord, would reveal myself in visions. I would speak to them in dreams. But not with my servant Moses. Of all my house, he is the one I trust. I speak to him face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the Lord as he is. So why were you not afraid to criticize my servant Moses? Pause in the scripture for a moment. I have sometimes heard this verse used to defend the man of God or the woman of God in a church scenario. You better be careful before you criticize the Lord's anointed one. And in case you need to hear this today, you're the Lord's anointed one. All right? Moses is not a pastor. He's the leader of people. And a lot of pastors like to fashion themselves as being a David or a Moses. But unless God has spoken that to you, just go by your birth name. All right? You are the Lord's anointed one. And so is the person that you talked about today. The Lord was very angry with them, and he departed. And as the cloud moved from above the tabernacle, there stood Miriam, her skin as white as snow, not like me, but from leprosy, okay? And when Aaron saw what had happened to her, he cried out to Moses, and he said, oh, my master, please don't punish us for the sin we have foolishly committed. You hear that? When Aaron saw what happened to his sister, don't let her be like a stillborn baby already decayed at birth. So Moses cried out to the Lord, oh God, I beg you, please heal her. And you would think Moses got a lot of favor with the Lord. He'd be like, all right, because you asked. The Lord said to Moses, if her father had done nothing more than spit in her face, wouldn't she still be defiled for 7 days? So keep her outside the camp for 7 days, and after that, she may be accepted back. So Miriam was kept outside the camp for 7 days, and the people waited until she was brought back before they traveled again. So in this story, Aaron and Miriam, the siblings of Moses, they criticized him. And here's what's interesting. You probably have not realized this before. It says that they criticized him because of who he married. That's where the main offense was. But when it came out of their mouth, what it was, doesn't God speak through us too? So in other words, it went from something that they really didn't like, that probably wouldn't have been accepted very well. So instead, what they did was they made it about themselves. Hey, what about me? And that's what gossip is. We talk about somebody else, but at the core of it, it's about us. And God was not having any of it. Now, I did a lot of research on this to try to figure out, why is it that just Miriam got the leprosy? That seems a little sexist. Why didn't Aaron get it too? Most of what I find is the assumption is that it began with Miriam, but Aaron allowed it. That's not something that we have confirmed, but that is something that is stated here. What's also great to know is at the end, as Moses does intercede, the Lord says, you can bring her back in 7 days. He doesn't say she'll be healed in 7 days, but he says you can bring her back in 7 days, which means she's gonna be healed in 7 days. So he had some kindness in this, but he needed to send a message, and here's why. People who have influence need to do better. These are the big three, okay? If the Israelites are the Avengers, this is Captain America and Thor. And Iron Man, come on, Iron Man. All right, thank you. All right? And so what's happening here is they can't even get along, and so they start speaking out of turn about other people. I've got some scriptures that I want to share with you, just so that you know, and these are from the King James. I want you to have them as close to the original English as we had them, but you've got Psalm 141:3, set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth, keep the door of my lips. Sometimes it just hits a little different when you hear it that way. How about Proverbs 12:19, the lip of truth shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Proverbs 18:2 says, a fool hath no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. It's interesting because a fool doesn't give any thought to what his lips say. And so not only can loose lips sink ships, they can destroy people's lives, including the one who speaks in that way. Because the reality is, if you're known as a gossip, most people won't come to you and say, you're known as a gossip. And so for everybody who's ever thought, well, if people thought I was a gossip, they would tell me. Why would they tell you when you so clearly don't tell other people directly what you think about them? And also over time, the person that is always eager to tell you something that's gossip, it doesn't take long before the person that you're saying something to starts thinking, wonder what they say about me when I'm not around. So let's talk about, first of all, what is gossip? Well, scriptures really provide a definition spread out more amongst a description of a person rather than the actual verb or the act of it. They describe gossip in action, but the Bible uses gossip to describe people more than it uses it to describe a pattern of communication. One definition that I found said this: the sin of gossip is bearing bad news behind someone's back out of a bad heart. Now, some of us, we struggle with gossip, and some of us, we struggle with the opposite. We're like verbally and emotionally constipated because we're too afraid that anything we say is going to be gossip. And so because we've been raised in church, maybe we're like, well, that's negative. I can't say that to anybody. It is not communicating a negative fact. It is a bad communication without somebody's knowledge or behind their back, with bad knowledge or bad motives. And the bad motives are key to almost all of it. Not 100%, but almost all of it. Because if you speak out of turn, you can say you're sorry. We've all done that before. But if your intent is to wound or derail or to make yourself look better at somebody else's expense, it's a sin. It's an issue of the heart. In Romans chapter 1, in verse 28, it says this, and a lot of people use this when it talks about physical sins that people go through, but listen, since they thought it was foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, and you feel free to stop me if you think anything that I list here in every kind of wickedness is not wickedness, but it's goodness, right? So sin, greed, hate, envy, murder. Murder's bad, right? We're good on that one? Okay. Quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. It's in a sentence with murder, and we're like, yeah, but I had to vent. Why don't you murder somebody and go to the judge and be like, sorry, Your Honor, I had to vent. I had a lot of anger, and I vented with a knife. Oh, speaking of that, verse 30, they are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, boastful. They invent new ways of sinning. That's creative. And then the add on there, and they disobey their parents. Some of you are like, amen. They refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. Would gossip mean you deserve to die? You remember what Jesus said about anger? He said, you've heard it said, don't murder. But I'm telling you that if you carry anger in your heart for somebody, you've already murdered them. He's not just saying how to make sure it doesn't become murder. He's not just saying make sure that you guard your heart so that you don't actually have physical violence. He's saying this needs to be cleaned up because it's just as guilty. Because the outward actions don't happen if the inward ones don't happen first. And the reality is there's way too many murderous Christians who just haven't physically murdered somebody. Now, there are a couple things that I want to highlight about this. First of all, the gospel is also called what? The good news. Okay, well, if we give it the definition of good news, wouldn't gossip be the opposite of the gospel? Because it's bad news. And you're like, well, I could be talking to somebody about Jesus. I could tell somebody I like their haircut. I could tell somebody I like their shirt. Well, that one's a lie. I could tell them anything else that's positive or encouraging, just like Caleb. But I think I'd rather tell them about this person and who I saw them with at the coffee shop. So there's two forms of this bad news that we spread. One is bad information, and we've all been guilty of this before. This is when the story might be false, and you know that beforehand, but you still decide that you're going to share it. This is not just gossip, this is slander. Or if you texted it, it's libel, okay? This is when you knowingly spread something that is false, regardless of what your motive is on it. And unless you're the Babylon Bee, it's not funny, all right? I remember especially this happened during the years that Obama was president. I used to get a lot of email forwards, telling me things about politicians. And sometimes now all the time now you'll see it online on Facebook about either side, either candidate. I cannot believe that some people have so little to do in their life that they have to fill up my feed with memes about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I don't give two crackers about either one of them. I'll vote my conscience, and we'll talk about voting later in the year. But what I'm saying is, give me a funny cat video. Right? Please, give me a recipe to try with my family. Tell me something that's gonna help me get through my day and not make me paranoid that everybody in the world is out to ruin my life. But here's what ended up happening. I'd get these emails, and then I would get an email after that saying, hey guys, sorry, I just went to Snopes.com and it's not true. Well, I just had to read 2 emails to find out that what I read in the first one wasn't true. I don't even have the energy to try and fact check the things on Facebook. Facebook doesn't have the energy to fact check the things that are on Facebook. So they use AI, and that never goes wrong. I'm saying those of us that grew up watching The Terminator, we already know where we're headed. But my point about it is this. If you don't like somebody, you are way faster to tell somebody the bad news about them, whether it's a politician or somebody on the other side of the sanctuary, than you are about somebody that you like. It's human nature. I have fallen victim to it, and so have you. So the first one that we're talking about is bad news. It's false, but the other kind of bad news is not false, it's just unfortunate news about somebody. You might have even heard something like this, hey, it's not gossip if it's true. Anybody ever heard that? Is that just me? That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. No, it's actually worse gossip. Like you're spreading the decay and the downfall of somebody else. If it is needlessly sharing that shameful truth about somebody, it's gossip. The biblical phrase for this is called a bad report, giving a bad report about somebody. Just because somebody did something wrong doesn't mean that we need to or get to talk about it with others. Now, all of that being said, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you do need wise counsel. Sometimes you have been holding something in and you have felt too guilty to talk about it, and you need to go to somebody that is a safe place. You were never meant to absorb all of the bad information about the world like a sponge that's never gotten wrung out. Have you ever had a sponge that needed to get wrung out? What happens? It stinks, man. You don't want to carry all that garbage around. At some point, you got to let it out, but you have to be wise about it. And in the church, we need to do better. I personally, maybe you do too, I know people that won't go to church because they say it's no different. And I went to a church and I was wounded by other Christians. And I'm like, let's sit down and share stories. Because I've been gossiped about by people who love Jesus. But so was Jesus. So was King David. In Psalm 41, he actually writes about people gossiping about him when he's sick. Psalm 41, starting in verse 5, he says, "My enemies say nothing but evil about me. How soon will he die and be forgotten?" they ask. That's dark. "They visit me as if they were my friends." Oh, those kinds of enemies. Got it. "They visit me as if they were my friends, but all the while they gather gossip. And then when they leave, they spread it everywhere. All who hate me whisper about me, imagining the worst. He has some fatal disease, they say. He'll never get out of his bed." Those are 4 verses written by King David. So in the back of your mind, when any conversation begins to steer toward the topic of the other person, you can ask yourself, is this true? And do I need to know it? Gossip is hidden. The English Standard Version, if you read that in the Bible, it names a gossip as a whisperer. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because yes, sometimes we have to be sensitive in the information that we share with one another, but just for your own information, this is an alert that I try to install in my programming, that if I need to talk to somebody and then immediately my voice has to drop and I have to go to the corner of the room, is it time sensitive that it needs to be whispered about there? Am I just dying to get this out and tell somebody? And there have been times I've felt that. I don't know if you're okay with your pastor saying there's times I've caved to gossip, but I just would rather not lie. Lying will probably be a sermon in the future. But gossip is hidden and it's stealthy, and we wrap it up with the Christmas wrapping paper that looks like good intentions, and a lot of times that does come in the form of a prayer request. Hey, I'm just really concerned about blah, blah, blah. Oh, why? Well, don't tell anybody else. I just got to tell one person. And you know what the problem is? They have to hold on to it. They can't tell one person. Well, they got to tell one person. But they got to tell one person. And before you know it, you might as well have just posted it on Facebook, but nobody would have seen it because you're too busy posting political things that nobody's reading. Gossip is hidden, and it's nasty. And people are known as a gossip over time. Matthew chapter 12 addresses this in a general way. And here's how. In Matthew 12, in verse 33, it says, "A tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad." That's deep, isn't it? Y'all never highlighted that one. Yeah, but then Jesus says, "You brood of snakes, how could evil men like you speak what is good and right? For whatever is in your heart determines what you say." And this is a hard pill to swallow. Sometimes what's in our heart is wrath towards other people. Sometimes what's in our heart is malice. It means ill intent in what you say. I hope this wounds somebody else. You're not really looking for help, you're looking to wound. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. Jesus says in verse 36, "And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you." We read that, we know it's the words of Jesus, we know it's legit, and we're like, Try the vent comment when you get to Jesus. Could you imagine if that is as literal as it sounds? You walk up, you know you're going into heaven, and he's like, "All right, we're going through every idle word that you ever said. Can you give me a heads up how many pages there are?" Imagine Jesus, little Jesus humor. He's like, "I imagine there wouldn't be enough room in the world if all the books were written for..." Okay. Our heart motivation, and this is important, is not always obvious. And so on this side of glory, sometimes you're going to be misled by yourself. So you need to be surrounded by people who are willing to tell you, "I don't think I need to know this." You need to be surrounded by people who say, "I think you have an issue here." At one point in the last couple of years, I had a big hurt happen to me by somebody else. And what I was told lovingly by a few people is that whenever we would talk about something else, it would circle around to that person and that issue. And I realized I have unresolved wounds there. Now, I wasn't necessarily trying to, as far as I could tell, wound that person's reputation, but it was a very painful thing for me, and so I found a great need to talk about it. Whether I wanted to ruin the reputation or not, I was. Whether they deserved to have their reputation ruined or not, It's not by me. I'm not the hand of God in that scenario. God can handle the judgment that happens to other people. I don't need to be the self-proclaimed enforcer. All right? So a lot of times we just need to be surrounded. So let's talk about how to handle gossip before we go into our group discussion. I've got 3 main things you can do to handle gossip if somebody comes to you, and I'll also talk about what to do when you're gossiped about. But spoiler alert, you're not gonna like it. But here's how you handle gossip when it's brought to you. The first thing you do is you refuse it. Now, this is awkward, but here's the good news about this. You'll only have to be awkward about it a couple of times before they stop. Could you imagine if somebody like walks over and they're like, so, I heard, and you went, not my business. Could you imagine if you just looked at them and said that? Everybody in the church, they look over, they're like, that person was about to gossip? It's not my notes. I kind of like that. Maybe we can make it a thing. I remember, I shared this before, but one time when I was doing Top 40 radio, there was a morning show host who said a lot of off-color and mildly sexist comments. And so they kept trying to tell him, hey, this is inappropriate. And over time, what they did one day was they got him a bell, like the kind that's at a secretary's desk when you're like waiting for somebody, ding. And it started to become a thing on the morning show that every time he said something that was inappropriate to them, they would ding it. And that didn't work. It actually encouraged him to say more things. He loved hearing the bell. So eventually what they got him to agree to was to wear one of those electric shock collars that you put on dogs. And every time he said something that was off color, they hit the button. And I'm gonna tell you, it made for great radio. Radio is theater of the mind. You can't see it. And so when he's talking about something and he makes some sort of, you hear that, you're like, oh, they got him again. Here's the problem. It didn't take long before they were like, you know what? Sometimes it's funny to just do it anyway. As a matter of fact, because he used to say sexist jokes, they started something called Hers Day Thursday, where extra ladies would come into the radio station, and that would, of course, egg him on, and it would make it worse. And here's the moral of this story. People are not good. He's not doing right, and once they find a way to try to correct it, they're not doing right. And sometimes we just end up wounding each other, don't we? The first thing you can do is just to refuse it. Could you imagine the power that would have happened if they said, the next time you say a sexist comment, I'm gonna give you dead air on this side of the microphone? That would stop it, because dead air is bad for ratings. I read somewhere, I didn't put it in my notes, but I'll share it with you. Somebody's suggestion was whenever they were approached with gossip, they said, I don't respond, I just stare at them. Giving you all sorts of fun tools, aren't I? The first thing you can do is refuse it. Now, in all reality, gossip is probably gonna come from somebody that you love and that cares about you. So when they bring it to you, you probably don't need to yell it. It's such a great visual, isn't it? I know. But what you can do is just say, I don't think they want me to know that. I promise you they'll understand what you're saying. Now, they may kind of push a little bit more, but you can say it again, no, I really don't think they want me to know that, okay? Please don't drag me into your issues. Number 2, you can rebuke it. Rebuke is a fun biblical word. We don't use it any other place, do we? I did a thumbs down on that post. I rebuked her post so hard. Facebook, would you give us a rebuke button? You can actually push back against it. You can challenge the validity of it if you're feeling that froggy. So you could actually rebuke it. Instead of just refusing to entertain it, you could push back and say, have you verified that that's actually true? And if you have, why do I need to know it? That will for sure get people to stop talking to you. One time I remember speaking to somebody and they were very upset about a third party, and that's the way it goes. And they were like, man, what do they want, my arm and my leg? And I went, I don't know, have you asked them? But I went to the third party and I said, they are very upset and I am not comfortable in the middle, and this is what they said, and hopefully you can handle that. And then they got mad at me. Why did you tell them I was upset with them? I said, you were upset with them. They didn't know you were upset with them. How are they going to fix it if they don't know that you're upset with them? And they never talked to me about that third party again. This was a very long time ago. If you really want to go the extra mile, you can sit down with them and you can even look up scriptures. You can pray with them. You can say, hey, look, I struggle in this area too. Here's the areas I struggle with gossip. Let's hold each other accountable. That's how you push back. You can rebuke it. But here's your third R. And this is the one that they really don't like. You can redirect it. And when I say redirect it, I mean, yes, you can redirect it in prayer, but I have found that most of the time, the best redirection is, I am so sorry you're that upset with them. Would you like me to help you brainstorm what you're going to say to them? Oh, I'm not going to say anything to them. I just wanted to tell you. Oof, I'm not comfortable being the only one that knows that. But since you got to talk to them, because if you don't, obviously I will. So I'd love to help you come up with a way to discuss it with them. Now, one of two things will happen. They'll either never bring it to you again, or they will. And that's the better one. I don't know how to say this to this person. Help me figure out how to say this in a kind way. Because this, what comes out, is not going to be kind. Help me. Redirecting it is the best thing to do, but it also takes the most work, just to be honest with you. The other thing that you can redirect them to, by the way, and this one takes a lot of humility for somebody to do it, but I've done it, and I'm proud of the people that I know that have done it. You can also try to redirect them to the other people that they have spread the bad report to. And that takes real spiritual and emotional maturity to go back to somebody a week later, a day later, a month later, a year later and say, I shouldn't have talked to you about that. I was really in my feelings. I was upset. I was hurt. I didn't have good motives. The problem is, God might forgive us for the gossip, but we still talked to 17 people about it. And now their view of whoever you gossiped about is changed. And you can't put it back in. So let's talk about Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey is known for money. He's known for money. And a lot of people, they love Financial Peace University. We will be providing a Financial Peace University class in the fall. We don't have the dates yet, but we'll be having that for those that are interested in taking that class. Lots of great advice in Financial Peace University. And let me tell you something. If you've ever listened to Dave Ramsey on a podcast or a teaching, he don't play. And at his company, he has a policy when it comes to gossip. I wrote it down word for word so I wouldn't mess it up. It says, this is the no gossip policy at Dave Ramsey's company. Gossip is defined as discussing anything negative with someone who can't help solve the problem. Uncomfy. If you're having computer problems and IT is slow about helping you, you don't complain about it to the sales rep in the break room. You talk to your leader because he or she can and will do something about it. If a team member is discovered gossiping, they receive one warning, and after that, they're fired. And Dave Ramsey says, yes, I have fired people for gossiping, and I will do it again because it keeps the health of the team and the company to something that can be measured. It's not something he plays around with. Could you imagine if that happened in friendships? Well, you gossiped about me, that's one. We'd speak a little differently about people. Negative stuff is going to happen. It's inevitable. But complaining in a way that damages another person made in the image of God is disloyalty to the Father who made you in the very same image. Because he asks us to be unified. And we've talked about this a lot. He says, people will know you by your love for one another. Could you imagine how countercultural it would be if Christians were known as the people where Republicans love Democrats and vice versa, where the racial divides didn't exist, where we even loved the people who cheer for the New England Patriots or the Dallas Cowboys? Could you imagine how countercultural that would be if nothing stopped our love for one another, and yet we still were like, but you're still wrong and you voted for an idiot? We do that part. We don't do the first part. James chapter 4 says this. He says this in verse 11. He says, don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. And by the way, it says against each other, not to each other. And then it says, if you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. God alone, who gave the law, is the judge, and he alone has the power to save or destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor? So this is the last part before we go to our question time, but what if the gossip is about you? What if somebody comes to you and they say, hey, they said blah, blah, blah about you? Now, you don't want to make that person caught off guard, so you should probably say, I'm going to have to address this. And they might freak out, but again, they may not come to you with gossip again. You have to address it individually. I would encourage you to pray before you do this, get your heart to the right place. Because what's going to happen is if you go and you tell a bunch of people, you're gonna get an echo chamber of people that like you and say, I can't believe he did that. And all of a sudden you feel completely validated in any course of action you take. Pray first, don't go to an echo chamber, right? And then go to them one-on-one. And this is crucial. And it may not fix it. As a matter of fact, recently I had something that I considered evil done against me. And when I was talking to my safe place where I was seeking counsel, they kind of asked me, like, don't you know, like, what to do about it? And I said, I do know, but I can't do it yet because I would do it with the wrong motive and I would damage my soul in the process. And have enough self-awareness now to wait and then do what I knew I was going to do to begin with, but not damaging my soul in the process.